we've always talked about workflow context and using that context to give you good search results and good suggestion and ground the Copilot. But now it's like, hey, can we elevate that and give that to you, you know, everything at the right time, the right website, the right person, the right file, the right snippet, you name it.
If you look at some of these things and how we started the year, the only enrichment we were doing was, is this code or is this text?
It wasn't code is this. Yeah.
That was the only enrichment we were doing. We were not doing automatic naming.
Yeah.
We were not doing a lot of annotations. We were not doing any suggested searches.
Lighter just got into tags, maybe briefly.
And this was like the beginning of the year, just getting into tags.
Yeah.
We hadn't even touched the auto-generated related links.
Yeah.
And now fast forward to where we are now, which is we've got an abundance of generated data, not only, you know, generated through AI, but then also leveraging the context from where that asset or that material was coming from or originated.
Yeah, and let me just you know, also add to that, like, it's not necessarily generated in the sense that it comes out of thin air. Right. It's never been. It's also collected,
for sure.
Right? Like, so like pieces, like, you know, the thing that's special about it is aware and taking note of that context, that metadata, that file, that folder, you know, whatever else. And we get a whole step function of that when we're integrated into the IDE. But also too, you know, then from the things that we can collect, can we automatically associate things that we already have with new things that come in?
Totally.
So that's a level of generation, or can we generate from scratch entirely?
100%.
And I think that's a big motivator. People, right?
That's right.
Of, you know, how do I suggest some related people to this without me actually explicitly telling you that Tsavo is related to this?
That's right. That's wild, by the way.
Which is wild.
You put some code into pieces or a screenshot or something. It's like, oh, Mack and Mark is like already attached to this.
Right.
We can unpack that a little bit, you know. And I wish Brian and Sam were here, but you know, we've even made the upgrade from spherical embedding spaces to graphical embedding spaces, which allows that to expand over time and create unique associations to data that we've never seen.
Right. And that all plays into the normalization of the data, which was like a big thing that we did this year, specifically in the last couple of months, and how we make that data more available to us as product leads, product owners, building these experiences and connecting these dots, which is like, maybe we could talk about how that unlocks all sorts of product features and capabilities. I mean, all day long, but.
Yeah. And to put that in perspective, that's like going from like a snippet to a related link. So if you're on a website, you're like, show me the related snippets.
That's right.
And then if you have those snippets, you're like, okay, now show me the related files to that stuff. You have the files, you're like, oh,
related people. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. Now you're back to snippets.
It's like very simply like, hey, Mac sends me a shareable link. I take that shareable link and I save that to pieces. And automatically, since I saved that for Mac, I'm going to attach Mac to this snippet. And then anytime after in my flow, when I'm starting to, you know, either one, proactively save, or two, automatically save, which is a completely different rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And it's similar enough in some sort of, you know,
Ephemeral
some sort of
sense.
sense. Then we can go ahead and attach, you know, Mac as a related person to that snippet, enabling me to know that, hey, Mac is a subject matter expert of what Tsavo Knott does say. And just go ahead and say, hey, Mac, can you help me out with this snippet? I think this automatically saved for me.
I think it's like such a magical feature, right? Not only magical, but helpful, right? Especially in a small team environment, or if you get into a larger team environment, having a sense of who might be able to assist you with what type of problem that you're facing. And I'll tell you what, it's the best product feature.
Oh yeah. People are blown away.
And I always get the question of like, how did that know? How did that know that Tsavo was related to that snippet, even though it came in off of OCR?
Or screenshot, right?
Like, how does it have any idea? And it does.
That's a magic trick right there.
Absolutely.
You're like, I just put a screenshot in, and it knows Tsavo wrote that code.
That's right.
You know, that's pretty insane. And a lot of people, you know, like some of our systems, they do rely on the context of like Git, you know, and get information and stuff like that. And you have like these systems that developers love, like Git blame. It's like, who can I accuse? You know, that type of thing. But for us to have, you know, taken that type of system and made it aware enough to have zero context and still know with a high fidelity of accuracy, like that's pretty awesome for us. Think about the implications on like onboarding to a large enterprise. You come into this team, you know, I mean, enterprises are like 6 months to onboard to. You got to figure out like, okay, what internal docs do I read and who do I talk to about this? And like, what project should I reference and all that? Spend a couple days with pieces, starts to aggregate that. Here you go. You know, we're going to get you underway.
Absolutely.
Right.
To me, it's like not not necessarily the elephant in the room, so to speak, but like we, from the very beginning, we did everything offline first.
Yeah.
Right.
Big time.
Which is crazy, you know.
Big time,
I don't mean to steal anybody's thunder here, but like, it was such a big sort of architecture decision that we made so early on and built into the philosophy of our entire company.
At our DNA.
It's at our DNA, right? And I think we're starting to see some of the dividends pay off now, but I don't even think that we've scratched the surface in some of those dividends that are yet to pay off. But I mean, you can see this. We see this all the time. You know? Developers are very privacy conscious. They are curious of where is their data going. And when you can respond to them and say, your data is all in machine, it's such a powerful moment.
Major shout out to our ML team. I mean, they're world class. You know,
great.
Sam, Brian, Kieran, Dom, Leo. Like, I mean, like they're just absolutely excellent. And also too, like you bridging the gap between like what we need from an infrastructure and an ML ops perspective, working with Brian and our chief AI officer, Sam. Like, I think the unification between the CTO office and the AI office is super important. But then also too, understanding what are the deep components of the supply chain that end up boiling up to Mack's world, right? Or to Caleb's world or to 𝗚𝗏𝗽's world, the people that are building these experiences. And to touch on that example that you talked about there, like, sure, every app in the world can add a tag to a piece of data, right? That's a known. But we didn't ship like user added tags until we knew how to take a tag and inject it into a embedding space that was able to then kind of conform and create new groupings of tags that could auto apply it. So our breakthrough was really around the embedding spaces as opposed to, you know, oh, like, is this tag added? So when we converted to a kind of constant space to a, you know, kind of an expanding space, right? Spherical to graphical. I mean, that breakthrough allowed us to move so fast and do things like, you know, people and tags and links and all that. I mean,
Shout out Dom.
yeah, Dom's like, you know, cooking up some crazy stuff on that side of things.
Yeah.
You also mentioned like people, you know, they kind of get what we're talking about, but our team is so dialed into this philosophy now. They're like anticipating, okay, this is the way things are naturally going to progress. Models are going to get smaller, more precise, whatever else. They're working on embedding things that allow us to be like LLM agnostic, right? Bring your own model. Even to do that, you know, most companies want you to build on their vector database because the way they do embeddings is unique to that, and they get the vendor lock-in. So if you do something so much through like even if you train your prompts to be optimized for GPT-4 versus optimized for Llama 2 versus optimized for Gemini, that's a whole bunch of re-architecture, retraining, whatever else. If you don't start with hey, that's gonna be what it is. I'm always gonna have a plug and play cloud model. How do I get that local stuff to run fast, offline, constant, and that be the true core?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big.
Being able to take your fine-tuned Llama version on your own company's data and not have to host it yourself on a massive, you know, call it like
Compute
a
instance somewhere,
compute instance, Kubernetes, whatever, and spend an arm and a leg, when basically what you can do is just have a dedicated on-prem solution or even run it on your own machine if it's small enough, and then ship it to all of your employees locally. And I think that solves a ton of data consciousness problems and enables you and your company to be like far more efficient while also leveraging today's technologies. And this stuff isn't going away.
No, it's not. It's so funny. Like, you could take the DMG, you know, installer from pieces today, and if you put that on like a 2025 MacBook, it's going to run 100 times faster, right? It's like the same binary is going to be, you know, ready to go for that ARM architecture, whatever else. And it's just like, as long as your hardware continues to get better, and this is why, by the way, it was the Apple keynote right at the same time we were starting this company.
Yeah, they started out with gaming.
They started out with the gaming and the new encoding and the
stuff.
M series chip,
Yeah.
right? And it was like 6 or 7 months before the M series came out. And even Google was like starting to, you know, kind of show some of their tensor chips and things like that. Now we got the NPUs and the T100s and everything that's like optimized around like hardware for ML. But we saw that, I'm like, it's a no-brainer. They're double downing on client, right? These clients are getting thicker, if you will. And we're like, that's no problem. We could run a small model on that all day long. Yeah. So then, yeah, I mean, you know, call it 2020, 2021. We just said everything we do, it's a known how to do it in the cloud, given unlimited compute, unlimited spend, whatever. Can we package it, make it small, And also, can we make it fast? Less than 100 milliseconds on every bit of pipe, because we know that when we look at other material types, the weight of that material type, like a Figma fragment or a AK clip or an audio fragment, if you have to just transport that over the wire, even that's like a couple 100 seconds.
Absolutely.
So this is a tool that's like, hey, I'm keeping up with your workflow. All of that, like think about how fast you switch tabs or, go between apps or, send someone a message. That AI needs to be able to keep up with that, but also not melt your device, right? And like keep it, 100, 200, 300 gigs of, or megs of RAM, gigs, but be fast.
I agree.
I think an underutilized feature that we're still continuing to try to put a lot of work towards is that discovery flow of like, hey, you point to a file or a folder and so on, and you're getting those useful snippets out of there in general. So with a lot of this work, especially on the ML side, like hats off to them, they make my life way easier. Being able to just go ahead and drop in some embedding updates, and boom, we just have a 10x version of discovery.
We should incorporate links, people, annotations to the discovery flow.
Oh yeah.
Because if we take a snippet from the folder that you're uploading or you're sharing with us to snippetize or discover some snippets through, like, we could probably do something that we could find some related people to elevate to you, some related links to elevate to you,
comments,
all these things,
even time
to the code,
like
itself.
how old is this code?
That's right.
How old was this commit? Stuff like that. It's a lot.
Give me a little scan of this directory here of this dude, and if it's a repository, like give me some more of this metadata, which is sick. Push that to the side. We're gonna make GitHub issues for that one. It's pretty awesome. Nice way to make that. In your workflow, bringing the product to the flow, minimizing the context switching, enabling all the things that we may be able to do in the desktop app right there in your IDE or in your browser, whether it's solving a problem or generating some type of code or finding who's related to anything. But that I think was something that we did very early on and doubled down on this year. And we called it the fringes. The fringes right?
Of the workflow.
And we introduced a couple new fringes this year.
Yeah.
Obsidian and Jupyter Hub, increased our browser support for Opera.
And we went deeper into the OS.
And we went deeper in the OS. Yeah. As soon as you leave that IDE, that development environment, you're losing what you were currently doing. Right? Yeah. And therefore you're starting something new, whether it's collaborating with a teammate or trying to solve a problem in the browser or reviewing a PR or whatever it is. But as soon as you leave, you're trying to do something new. Therefore, as a result of starting something new, ultimately you're going to need to come back.
That's right.
And that process of getting back is hard, right? I think all of us can kind of agree that getting back into that flow is difficult. It's really hard.
And by the way, just to add to that, for a lot of folks out there, they're like, oh, like you just went from your IDE to the browser, like what's the deal? Right. And I think what people don't understand about developer workflows is that you're not just in your IDE. Like what were the 3 files, like in your short-term memory, you're like, oh, I know I was bouncing between these files.
That's right.
And I was focused on these lines of code. And I know this is the problem I'm trying to solve right now. I know, by the way, let me look at the stack trace in my terminal. So it's like that environment, the information overhead, just in the IDE alone, that's what we mean when you lose context, right? You switch the browser, right? Now you got 50 tabs open, and that's a whole other set of information overhead.
And imagine you're a data engineer, right?
Yeah.
And your whole job is reliant on remembering what is the value of this variable as stored memory.
That's right.
And as soon as you're starting to switch your context into the browser, all that overhead, now you've completely forgot where you were. You forgot that variable, what it was holding in memory. You forgot where you were going to push that data to, and you're starting a new train of thought.
Yeah.
And so, that is, to me, the value of operating at the fringes.
Yeah.
Because if you have to solve this problem, you don't have to go to the browser. You're right there. You've got open files and got that code still in focus, and you can go and talk to the pieces of Copilot. You can go and save the snippet to pieces or reference some of the snippets that you previously saved, and so you're minimizing that.
We don't need another mega tool. Right. Of course the desktop app is extremely robust for a lot of people, and they do like that centralized location. But I think along the lines of hey, developers already have the massive pillars of their workflow, right? Can we be where they are? Preventing them from having to jump around. And I think there's something to be said about the overhead, getting reduced in capacity due to the fact that like you're now looking at a new UI. Like looking at IntelliJ versus looking at Chrome, I think you're just going to take like 10% of your short-term memory capacity away because now you're in a new app.
Yeah.
So with pieces, it's like, okay, I can stay in IntelliJ and access what I need from Chrome or access, something in a conversational form factor through the Copilot right there.
That's right.
Right. So just because the thing I'm looking at didn't visually change, I have now 10% extra short-term memory. Right. So it's something super subtle, but I think it actually adds up. Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah, and vice versa.
Feel free to chime in about like,
Yeah.
vice versa.
For me, like even just like operating on fringes, I start to go a little deep.
Yeah.
And one of the first thing that kind of comes to mind was even just from like an ML perspective, being able to, and I know we've touched on this a lot, but be able to package a lot of these models in any sort of like native language that we need it to, and then also interact with it via Dart FFI, which enables us to be able to ship between Mac OS, Windows, Linux, as well as, with recent Dart updates, enabled us to be able to go ahead and start streaming those outputs, which was an absolute need to have, as well as be able to stop
been so
and all that.
What was that, like C bind gen stuff or like, something like that? Really kind of powers the FFI stuff.
Which is so crazy now, because what we can do is we're able to even spin up native threads as opposed to like Dart. What we can do is we can spin up like an isolate, which is like almost like pseudo threads in a way, which just takes resources away from the main thread. But oh my gosh, so much power and so much more in the future that we can use to leverage a lot of those native functionalities. And I know we've done a lot of research into it in the past as well, with regard to like, for instance, native OCR.
Oh yeah.
So like as a developer, it's not necessarily super easy to be able to go into Swift or go into C++, to be able to tap into my computers. And then we were like, no. We're not going to do this. We're going to jump into the Dart and the Flutter land. And really like, how can we really modernize our stack, while also having the best of both worlds. And this was like fantastic.
Let's just say it was a risky call. It was an unpopular opinion from a lot of the engineers at the time, and
Internal battles.
Yeah. Like the web dev space is unfortunately like pretty fragmented and very opinionated, right? All the way down to your build system. Like, are you using Lightning? Are you using ES Build? Are you using Webpack? Are you using Rollup? Are you using Vite? Like, my gosh, right? And they all kind of like, it's like, okay, decision number one, how do we build this thing? Decision number two, what's the framework? Which by the way upgrades every freaking 6 months, and then decision number three, like, what's our aesthetic, right? What's our CSS framework?
Right.
What's our JavaScript framework? What's
CSS,
everything, right?
Here.
So Dart, allowed us to kind of apply our expertise in isomorphism, which is, can we write as much code as possible and recycle that everywhere, right? Server side, client side, Mac OS, Linux, and Windows, and then extend it as needed in a high performant regard, with FFI, right? And very specific, kind of language integrations, like with Rust or C++ or whatever. But yeah, that was crazy. And so in this motion from the web world to the native world, can we abstract away all these complexities for our integrations, for the desktop app, for all the like, so you can just make an HTTP call to a locally running Llama model that's optimized GPU inside of an Onyx container. Like, that is not possible in a lot of regards. Oh, and by the way, same API across Mac OS, Linux, and Windows, right? Like, the stuff that Pieces OS does to abstract away like the complexity of the OS, without kind of like putting the guardrails on too much, is pretty crazy. And the whole philosophy was, we build products, our internal team builds products, our partners build products, eventually everyone will build products.
And this decision to keep, that API, Pieces OS, separate from the group is also to, hey, how are we going to ship this in the cloud? If we have some sort of like a mobile situation, or even, hey, if I can do some backup and sync, or if I can do shareable links, or I can publish his gists, and
or do the on-prem, or
like keeps it, or even, exactly, or even kind of moving forward into the enterprise conversation is like, hey, how can we do this on-prem? Super easy. Well, not super easy, but hey, conceptually easy to wrap your mind around.
With the day one.
Take pieces OS.
That's right.
Take it, package it, ship it with a Docker file, and then ship it to wherever you want. Call it a Cloud Run, which we currently have it in, but could scale that up to Kubernetes, App Engine, virtual machine, anything with your own specific resources. Or, since we already have it Dockerized, basically you could just host it on any one of your own machines, run that puppy with your own resources, and then boom, everyone can connect to it, which enables us to, write 95% of that code already, and then just have that specific 5%, if that even, for some of the cloud specific logic, and then boom, you're good to go. So what a great decision early on. That's paid a ton of dividends as well.
I think the name of the game is just, hey, how do we look at the lowest common denominator, around like just technical debt, keep that cost low. We have a very high performing team, and I wouldn't say like it's high performing for the dollar amount that it represents, right? Like we're a startup and you know how it goes, right? It's like, it's a whole thing. But I mean, my gosh, like we perform, like a Series A company, verging on Series B from a technology perspective. Like it's heavy duty. And I know that when we start to scale, we kind of climb that ladder, if you will, it's going to be pretty world class.
We can make this happen. We can make this work. It's going to be really fast. But for right now, we don't have a ton of cloud features. We didn't have a ton of users at the time. And it was like, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense for where we're at. And also we didn't have the features that we really like.
That required that.
That required that. So we're like, all right, how can we achieve the same features while also keeping it within a good budget? And we were like, all right, let's just kind of ship with Cloud Runs. They're pretty cheap. And then basically what we did is we designed a whole system that basically allocates all of the resources for everyone's what we call virtual private clouds. And that was actually goal number one even before Kubernetes.
Right.
Is
Cloud
how we
almost. It's like, hey, look, I would say like, just to build on that, like the premise was this, like with isomorphism, you just distill it down to what does the environment need? It needs compute, it needs persistence, and it needs, like memory, right? So it's like memory, storage, and compute. And so that's what a local device has, right? It has a CPU and it has a RAM system and it has an SSD. Let's just do the same thing in the cloud, right? And so like, can we build a system to deploy to a cloud that can turn on and turn off with inbound requests, and basically just leverage like this idea of give them a personal computer in the cloud that they can access whenever they need to do shareable links or things like that. And those computers can talk to each other. They can be managed by allocation servers and update servers and things like that. But on the other side is like, oh, let's just have a massive computer that everyone talks to that scales both horizontally and vertically, but from a cost perspective, it's always on. That's where we started, right? That's kind of what the industry just is like, yeah, do that, get an app engine, have it on, whatever else. We just took a completely different route. And in fact, it's the same database code. It's the same memory code. It's much of the same API code, just up in your cloud. And I think we use like file store, and then you have your compute memory from Cloud Run, and it's pretty damn good. And it's certainly low cost,
There's many different architectures and stuff out there, but the first one that Tsavo was talking about of having like one cloud that everyone interacts with and everyone's like talking to. Even if you have a router, and what happens is you kind of like create like an hourglass where you're scaling a lot of the bottleneck,
right?
As opposed to, hey, it's almost like you can kind of think of it as like a circle, and then it almost starts to look like the nucleus of an atom, and it starts to like boost out everything is just 3D in 3D directions. So it starts to kind of like snake out, and then you can scale those individual nodes as opposed to, hey, let's scale the bottleneck.
That's right. And when you talk about scaling the bottleneck, you're talking about making that bottleneck part wider, which is the most expensive part, like cost, right? It's not like the request, and it's not like, okay, where do those requests get routed to? It's like that load balancer, if you will, or that like lookup system or that cache or whatever else, you know. And I think like to talk about the future improvements, because, you know, you do deal with cold starts, and the big companies are working on serverless infrastructures, getting better at cold starts and, you know, things like that.
How do these technology decisions implicate the user, right? And what does it mean for me as a user to kind of have my own dedicated cloud, right?
Yep.
And what features does that enable for me? What are the security and privacy benefits that I have for myself, as opposed to that hourglass type situation where now all my data is now in the same database in the cloud as everybody else
From a
is.
creature perspective.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like, what are those implications, you know? And I think that there are a lot. And, you know, today we've got, you know, the user's ability to add their own personal domain, right? To sort of mask their shareable links under their mac.pieces.cloud.
Right.
And, you know, users coming to us, they start asking us, what is the point of this? Right.
Yeah.
And then when you give them this, oh, well, this is your cloud.
Yeah.
Right? And what does that mean for you?
They don't realize that.
They don't realize that.
It's like actually your cloud.
It's such an aha moment for them, right? It's like, oh, I see what this might mean for me. In
Yeah,
the future.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, I like that.
Yeah.
You know? And so the technology is phenomenal, but the way that that technology enables users and these capabilities, I think is so powerful.
Mark, you want to touch on ghost assets and proactive saving real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in the idea of the thing is like, hey, what is a ghost asset? And like, it's kind of from apparently it's like scary. Like, what's a ghost asset? It's like invisible, but
Pseudo
no,
asset.
none of that. It's basically all of your data, you know, all locally on your machine, first and foremost. And next is that, you know, how do we solve that challenge of like, what do you need? And bundling that to you when you need it. And basically what we can do is we can utilize ghost assets, which don't show up in your, you know, your list view or your gallery view, or even, you know, display to you in your context when you're selecting any one of your snippets in your Copilot. And then what we could do is, hey, when you start to search for stuff and you have no results, but that query is similar to, say, a code snippet that you have that's saved as a ghost, we can say, hey, boom, we're going to actually turn this ghost into a real asset, or we're going to bubble those ghost assets up to you and say, hey, let's go ahead and save that. And boom, now it's a good
It's a hard asset.
a hard asset, saved asset.
So, you know, the premise, like the infrastructure behind the, you know, officially they're called pseudo assets, right, at the API level. But, you know, we kind of had the joke that like they're these like, you know, assets that are like between the afterlife and your real workflow, you know, ghost assets.
They're a product of your work.
Yeah.
Like,
they're like artifacts, right? Just like super kind of ephemeral artifacts. But what that actually enables is this always on system that's able to kind of shadow your workflow, follow you around and say like, how many times did I like look at this on this page, right? Or how many times did I copy this? Or how many times did I talk to this person or whatever else? And doing this at a operating system wide level, on device, air gapped, offline, in a performant regard, that means that we can truly go from the point of you saved to pieces and now pieces saves for you. Right. And we've always had this premise that like people are intelligent systems. They save because intelligent systems need to look things up, reference things, you know, and our job as developers have to remember something and look up the rest. But those intelligent systems, just like humans and human storage patterns, AI needs to save and AI needs to retrieve, you know. And so I think like the vision of pieces that people are going to see, you know, the product arc is going to be always on, saving what you need. You don't have to worry about it. And then when you do need something, it's going to be given to you in a proactive regard, you know, right thing at the right time, wherever you are. And the way we determine that is through your interactions, but also your current context.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be absolutely baller. But no, I mean, it comes back to the famous quote, you know, that you often say, and that is like, you don't realize you should have saved something until that point in time where you realize you didn't save it and now you need it.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
so
the worst.
that's the whole sort of premise of the feed. Right. And now the feed and you know, the feed is the way in which the user is going to sort of interact with this data. Right. But at the end of the day, this is Pieces OS. Pieces OS is going to be shadowing your workflow and getting a sense of, you know, what are you doing? What are you encountering? What are the code snippets and so on that you've kind of seen in your workflow that you've not clicked save on, that we can proactively capture for you in some sense, so that, you know, at a point in time in your workflow, 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, 2 days from now, we can elevate that item that we think that you're going to need and retrieve it. And so, what's cool about that is not just code, right? It's the people that you may be interacting with in your collaboration. It's the related links or the websites and URLs.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you saw some code. What doc site was it on? And what were you doing in the IDE before you saw that? And also, who were you talking within the hour to go find that stuff?
That's right. And in the IDE is where it excites me the most, right? And for me, I always use the idea of using a singleton pattern in Dart, right? Because I go and create a new class file, and I want my singleton pattern, and I will be the first one to admit I don't write it. I just go to another file and I copy and paste it.
Yep.
And so the feed, in a way, is going to be a way that's going to know I'm in a brand new class file. Give me my singleton pattern. That's the snippet. Inject, right? And so being able to elevate this data proactively and have a sense of I'm going to need this right now is, like I said, it's going to be cool.
I would say, it might even get to the point where when you open up that class file, the feed will have a link to a commit link on GitHub, which is the last time you started a new similar file with the boilerplate and everything like that, right? When you first get into a feature, you work on it for a day, you get from your boilerplate to slightly adjusted, but it's not fully deep, tailored to that.
Yep.
I mean, there's all types of stuff we can generate on the spot, point you into a direction of the current code base in the current branch, or just link you to, a previous commit on a previous branch that's already PR'd. And
we love that. I love that part too. Yeah. Even just first looking at the feed. Yeah. And we had talked about this conceptually before even looking at it. But after even looking at it, I was like, all right, it makes so much sense as a developer to be able to go ahead and say, hey, here's a code snippet, or hey, here's a person. Let me click on Tsavo, and then Tsavo's linked to this code snippet or this link or this tag. Click on that tag, and then it shows me more snippets or tags or people.
Shows you your Copilot conversations or your messages from such,
So even jumping back to that one saying that Tsavo likes to say a lot is half remembering that one thing and then looking up the rest. It's it was that one tag or it was that link or that person, and then traversing across the different graphs to be able to find that one thing.
That some of the opportunities and the implications are quite wild.
Yeah.
Spanning forward,
I would just add the stuff around the PRs, and it's we're all pumped to talk about this. Is wild, but we saw some stuff at GitHub Universe this year around some automated PRs and some automated fixes and stuff like that. But that human in the loop component is still going to be just sure, I might not be writing as much code or even reading as much code as a human, but I'm still going to be kind of operating at a level higher where I'm connecting the dots, right? And the GitHub Copilot doesn't know the conversation you just had in Microsoft Teams or the documentation from an internal doc on Notion or something or Google Docs that you were reading before to get some context on the PR.
Yeah.
And the problem is github.com and the Copilot inside of VS Code, that's all it knows, right? We know the entire operating system.
Yeah. Oh man,
and I mean it's going to be absolutely ridiculous.
There's also that major accountability factor.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Who do you hold accountable? You can't just go and fully automate PR.
Yeah,
because who are you going to hold accountable in the event that something gets through in the PR and there remains a problem?
Get blamed is going to be really funny when it's all AI.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
so you're going to talk to the system and you automate it.
Yeah,
so,
it's interesting.
And I love that too. As a developer, for instance, I'll ping Tsavo and I'll be like, hey, can you take a look at this specific spot in this PR?
Yeah.
Boom, you go clicks to it. Hey, we already had context of what you were just talking to me about.
That's right.
It's going to be able to suggest to you not only one, where you can take a look at it in the PR, but two, already be brewing on some solutions with it. Then also if someone comes to me and say, hey, Mark, can you take a look at this PR? It goes both ways.
It's insane too, because it's how many times do I respond to be like, hey, I know we might have done something similar. How do we do this again for this type of feature, right? Or whatever. And it's I could have an AI system that, sure, in 2028, maybe it's fine tuned to how I think and all that stuff. Maybe that's pieces, right? But the conversations we have about very pointed locations in pull requests are so specific to our internal dialogue, right? In context that's just not available in the code base. And that's through GChat, and then also too, it's we actually have the same type of conversations over and over and over. So, I'm like, hey, Mark, where did we do that before? I know we did some type of similar suffix pattern or some type of similar prefix pattern. can you go find that? So you got to go look that up, all that stuff. And, you know, now like the feed could recognize that and basically say, oh, I'm at github.com, pieces in the Chrome extensions, like previous commits, you know, very similar like that. One of the things that always kind of catches me off guard is, you know, we have this motto at our company that everyone knows about. It's 80% bot, 20% do, right? If you think about how much the world saw, how much we shipped, that represents the 20%. Now think about the 80% of decisions, conversations, thoughts, sleepless nights, you know, future projections, everything that we had before we even wrote that code, before we even shipped that feature. Like it, to say the least, this year has been absolutely insane. The observable component represents 20% of this year's mind share.
Yeah, it's great.
Right? It's like absolutely nuts. The amount of like just inline hard decisions that we're able to just navigate and then, you know, kind of intuitively not, you know, close any doors. And so it's kudos to us. It's kudos to the team. Kudos to ML, AI, plugins, design, everyone, you know.
Marketing, growth, all of that.
And our users.
And our users.
Go.
Thanks for sitting down, Jen.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Chad. Good
Mark,
chat.
Max. Good
Yeah.
stuff. We'll crush. Absolutely.
It's nice.
That's
That's a wrap.
a wrap.
Nice.